Hello everyone and welcome to NOLA News Now. My name is Alex and I will be your host for today's episode. Today we will be discussing the realistic expectations for the New Orleans Saints' upcoming season. Do me a favor and hit that like button as well as subscribing. And without further ado, let's get into it. So, we have to start where the Saints ended last season. The Saints finished third in the miserable NFC South with a 7-10 record. Considering a lot of people expected the Saints to make a push for the division or at least a wildcard spot last year, the sub-500 record was very disappointing. So, what caused us to fail so miserably last season? Obviously, a lot of people are quick to point at the failed Jameis Winston experiment. At the beginning of the 2022 season, I was all for Jameis. He had a good year in 2021, especially in terms of taking care of the ball. With 2 first-round picks on wide receiver Chris Olave and left tackle Trevor Penning, paired with the return of the multiple-time All-Pro receiver Michael Thomas, everything was set for the Saints offense to set fire and make a deep playoff run. In Week 1, at Atlanta, the tone was set. Michael Thomas had 2 touchdowns, Jameis Winston had no picks, and the Saints pulled off a comeback win to start the season 1-0. However, late in the game, famous Jameis suffered a back injury that he clearly struggled with throughout the end of the game. Come Week 2, at home against the Bucs, a game that I was at, his injury became evident. He threw 3 interceptions and the Saints offense struggled. Michael Thomas scored a touchdown, but it wasn't enough for the win as the Saints lost 20-10. Come Week 4, Jameis and MT were both injured and on the sidelines. Neither of them returned until the end of the season. On top of the injuries to Jameis and Michael Thomas, Marshawn Lattimore, Jarvis Landry, Trevor Penning, Bradley Roby, and Pete Werner all missed significant time to injury. Now, I think the main problem with the Saints last year wasn't, in fact, the injuries. I believe it was mainly due to the lack of competence in the coaching department. Offensive coordinator Pete Carmichael and new head coach Dennis Allen struggled mightily. Carmichael didn't call enough screens with Alvin Kamara and ran a far too conservative offense for a desperate Saints team. Assuming Dennis Allen can settle into the role as the leader of this team, and Pete Carmichael can go back to what he was doing under Sean Payton, then we can worry about injuries and what the roster looks like. Now let's go over the positives from last season. Chris Olave gave the Saints their first 1,000-yard receiver ever since Michael Thomas had 1,725 in 2019. He's looking like a true number 1 receiver of the future. Other rookies, including second-round pick Alontae Taylor out of Tennessee and UDFA Rashid Shaheed, were very good as well. Guard Cesar Ruiz had a breakout season before a late-season injury, and the rest of the O-line, when healthy, is top 10 in the league. On top of the receivers, the Saints could possibly have an elite tight end for the first time since Jimmy Graham, who the Saints just signed on a 1-year deal, with Juwan Johnson, who had 7 touchdowns last season. The Saints' defense remains elite, and it seems all they need is solid quarterback play and their team to stay healthy for them to take a weak NFC South. So, what have the Saints done in the offseason to address their issues? Well, their first move in the offseason was signing veteran Pro Bowl quarterback Derek Carr to a 4-year, $150 million deal to solve the QB problem. Carr is going into his 10th career season, and he's been a consistent starter for the Raiders, making 4 Pro Bowls in those 9 years. Despite his play, he's never had a stellar team placed around him, and has only had 2 playoff appearances in his stint with the Raiders. The Saints, however, will already be the best team he's ever been on, with the best line, receivers, and by a mile the best defense. On top of that, Dennis Allen was the head coach that drafted Carr in the second round of the 2014 NFL Draft, so there's already familiarity with the coaching. Carr has been put in the perfect position to succeed, and he will do much better than 35-year-old Andy Dalton did last year. Their second biggest move behind Carr is easily the signing of running back Jamal Williams. Last year for the Lions, he had over 1,000 rushing yards and led the NFL with 17 rushing touchdowns. With Alvin Kamara possibly facing a suspension, which you could check out my last video to dive into that, Williams can easily be the starter. Even with Kamara on the field, he's the perfect thunder to Kamara's lightning. Kamara thrived with Mark Ingram in his prime, and he should do the same with Jamal Williams. A 3-year deal for him will keep him in New Orleans for the remainder of his prime. The Saints also re-signed a very important piece of tight end Juwan Johnson and let go of former first-round pick bust Marcus Davenport. In the 2023 draft, the Saints drafted defensive tackle Bryan Bresee out of Clemson, defensive end Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame, and running back Kendre Miller out of TCU in the first 3 rounds. Miller can replace Alvin Kamara's style of play with a few years of learning. At only 20 years old, he has plenty of time to learn. Foskey can provide a second pass rusher alongside future Hall of Famer Cam Jordan to help bolster the Saints' pass rush. Finally, the first-round pick we spent on Bresee can help the Saints' miserable run defense from last season, which plagued their outstanding pass defense. Probably the biggest positive for the Saints going into the 2023 season has nothing to do with their team, though. It's all about the schedule. The Saints play the AFC South, the NFC North, and obviously the NFC South, the 3 worst divisions in football. Apart from the Giants, Jaguars, and Lions, they don't really have any tough opponents. The Saints will start at home against the Titans, which should be an easy win to begin the season. Experts have the Saints winning around 11 games and winning the South, but I honestly believe they can win more. I believe it's safe to say we can expect the Saints to win the NFC South and hopefully go far into the playoffs for the first time since Drew Brees was here. But what do you think? Will the Saints make a playoff run? Leave a comment down below. Also consider liking the video and subscribing to my YouTube channel. That's it from me. You're watching NOLA News Now. Peace out and who dat?